Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the McKinney Chapter of Sons of the American Revolution meeting for April 17th, 2025. And our president, Paul Andrees, is out this evening, so I'll running the meeting. At this time, be please stand, and Tom Wilson will lead us.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I give you this time and so it comes. The ones we know about, and we don't. Father, be with us tonight as we conduct some American Revolution. Help us to be better stewards relative to coming through the memories of our ancestors. Part of the revolution we already gave us, freedoms we have. Also, keep in mind all those that are not very freedoms and guys. All the members here safe and doing what you have to do.
Please remain standing and join me in the pledge, the United States flag. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, Peter Ford will lead us in the pledge to the Texas flag.
Yes, sir. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
And the SAR pledge, Glossary.
Of course. We, descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, who by their sacrifices established the United States of America, we reaffirm our faith,
Principles of liberty and our constitutional republic, and solemnly pledge ourselves to defend them against every foe.
And our mission statement, Bill Taylor.
The Sons of the American Revolution honors our revolutionary patriotism by promoting patriotism, serving our communities, educating our and future generations about the founding principles of our country.
Please be seated. I will pass on the microphone for self-introductions.
My name is William Graham. I live in Melissa, McKinney Chapter. Good evening. I'm Pete McClellan, and I live here at McKinney.
I'm Zach Garcia. I live in Melissa.
I'm Carol Milson, Tom's wife, and we live here in McKinney.
I'm Terry Burnett. I live in Bristol, Texas. I remember this.
My name is Russ Colburn. I'm a new member. And my wife Jill. We're from McKinney. Welcome.
Tom Van Fossen, I'm a dual member here, and a bunch of other chapters.
I'm Randy Bush. I'm the secretary of the Plano chapter, and your speaker tonight. And I'm also a dual member with the Prince William County, Virginia chapter of Colonel William Grace.
Jerry Greenville from McKinney.
My name is Patrick Jones, and I'm from Louisville.
I'm Sophia Brixey Chavez, and I'm from Louisville.
I'm Xander Brixley Chavez, and I'm from Louisville as well.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Christina. I'm Sophia's mom and Xander's mom.
Sophia is our honoree tonight. We'll get to see her, you know.
I'm Laura Ford, my wife Sammy, and we live in Anna.
Rich Bonaparte, registrar, this chapter, my wife Lynn.
Peter Ford, I'm with McKinney Chapter.
Authority Secretary, and online we have Al Dacey.
Mark McCraw, and I'm from McKinney.
And, yeah. Tom Ellison from McKinney. Like I said, next up, we have our program for tonight. We begin, read this title here. We've got to get this memorized sooner or later. We keep running you around to different places. Anyway, for our program, we are honored to have Randall Bush, who will present religion in the English colonies and early American republic, the Great Awakening. Randall Bush was born just south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in May of 1956. He grew up in a small town of Cannonsburg, got it right this time, Cannonsburg, which resides about 20 miles southwest of the city. This is the area that's considered the center of the Whiskey Rebellion, which he also has a pretty good presentation on. Anyway, he's currently a member of the Plano chapter, Texas Sons of American Revolution, and he serves as its secretary. He's also a dual member with, you just heard that about, with Colonel William Grayson chapter of Virginia SAR, where his patriot ancestor, Lieutenant William Reeve, was born and enlisted. By trade, Randall is an automotive restoration shop manager, technician, and historian. He is an avid genealogist and a history buff, particularly with regard to his family ancestry and the 16th and 20th century North American and European history. Randall and his wife Tracy reside in Providence Village, Texas. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Randall.
Those of you who heard me speak last year might remember I had to sit down to do it. I've got 2 new knees since then, so we are in, as they would say in Detroit, we are in business. So we won't have to worry about that one. There we go, life's coming along, all right. So as Tom said, little different presentation here. Generally, religion is not a huge topic for discussion, but this one's a little different. We know that the SAR is greatly concerned with the history of this nation. As such, you frequently hear discourses that focus on political or military events of the time period. The presentation you're going to hear tonight approaches this subject differently, that of religion, as a major component of the social structure of colonial America and the English colonies. Religion affected every aspect of colonial life. One of the most far-reaching and influential phenomena to occur was a series of religious events called the Great Awakenings. Colonial America and the United States has had a religious Great Awakening about every 80 years throughout its history. These have occurred roughly around 1735, 1805, 1885, and 1965. And they tend to last for about 20 years or so before society regains an equilibrium in their approach. In this discourse, we will consider the effects of 2 of these, which encompass portions of the 18th and 19th centuries. Touching religions of all denominations, whether established or nonconformist, the first Great Awakening began in British North America in the 1730s and lasted to about 1740. The second Great Awakening occurred in the United States during the period between 1795 to through 1835. First, though, let's get this out of the way. The disclaimer. Topics involving religion, like politics, can be dicey. This presentation, therefore, is not intended to present any religious group as superior or inferior to any other. The belief systems of each of the individual colonial religions are not up for scrutiny here or judgment, nor are the actions of any of the individual members, whether clergy or lay persons. Therefore, let us on to the subject at hand. Around this time, the 13 colonies were religiously divided. Now, one would think, with the fuss that Henry VIII put up, with the Anglican Church running everybody else out of England, you would think that their colonies would reflect a totally Anglican structure. Not so. We will find that many of the politicians and royalty of England in the late 16th and early 17th centuries were of dubious character when it came to what they did with their religiously different subjects. So the result is that these 13 colonies in the early 1700s and in the 1600s were quite religiously divided. Most of New England belonged to the Congregational Church. The middle colonies were made up of Quakers, Anglicans, Lutherans, Baptists, Presbyterians, Dutch Reformed, and in Maryland, Catholics. Southern colonies were mostly members of the Anglican Church, but there were also many Baptists, Presbyterians, and some Quakers. So you actually have this mismatch as, for lack of a better word, England and then Great Britain dumped their dissidents into North America. But this will be part of what proves to be their undoing, as you will see. Unbeknownst to them all, however, a European philosophical movement known as the Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason, was making its way across the Atlantic Ocean to the American colonies and would shape their foundations to the very core. Enlightenment thinkers emphasized a scientific and sociological view of the world while downplaying religion. In many ways, religion had become formal and less personal, which led to lower church attendance. Christians were feeling complacent with their methods of worship, and some were disillusioned with how wealth and rationalism were dominating the culture. Many began to crave a return to religious piety. The stage was set for a renewal of faith, and in the late 1720s, a revival began to take root as preachers altered their messages and re-emphasized concepts of Calvinism. Now, Calvinism is a theology that was introduced by John Calvin in the 16th century and stressed the importance of Scripture, faith, predestination, and the grace of God. Pockets of revivalism, however, had already occurred in the years prior, especially in the ministry of one Solomon Stoddard. Solomon Stoddard was the pastor of the Congregationalist Church in Northampton, Massachusetts. That's how Pennsylvanians say Massachusetts. Massachusetts. Beginning in 1670, so we're a little ways back now, a major religious leader of what was then the frontier, Stoddard demonstrated his willingness as one of the first to move away from the principles of the established Congregational Church. From then until his death 60 years later in 1729, he maintained a position of influence that went far beyond the boundaries of Hampshire County and left a lasting imprint on New England Puritanism. A graduate of Harvard College and his first librarian, Stoddard entered the ministry in a time of crisis for the Puritan community in New England. The first generation of church members was passing away, and their children showed little interest in meeting the rigorous requirements for the church membership. Now note this point. Since church membership was a prerequisite for English citizenship, the foundations for a New England theocracy was undermined. Stoddard was a champion of the halfway covenant. Then you can see that right in the middle. A means by which children of members could be baptized and remain as half members until they were able to demonstrate religious conversion. But Stoddard went even further. By 1677, he was no longer recording whether his parishioners were full or halfway members, thereby opening the privileges of membership, including English citizenship, to all who would join. He was more concerned with the lives and souls of second-generation Puritans than the strict precepts of the Congregationalist Church, and these views were reflected from his pulpit. Stoddard's hand-picked successor to succeed him in the Northampton pulpit was his grandson, Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was an important figure in colonial America and a leader of the Great Awakening. He was a Congregationalist pastor of one of the most significant churches in New England, and he was and remains one of America's most influential philosophical theologians ever. His contributions to the Great Awakening are significant. He is credited with starting it in 1734 and working with other evangelists, such as George Whitefield, fanned the flames of the movement until it engulfed all 13 colonies in the 1740s. After starting the Great Awakening with his sermon series, Justification by Faith Alone, Edwards was instrumental in working with British evangelist George Whitefield in organizing his itinerary for a revival tour of the 13 colonies. Edwards arranged for Whitefield to preach at his church in Northampton, where the fires of the 1734 revival were rekindled locally and spread throughout the colonies. Edwards wrote numerous publications defending the Great Awakening revivals against old light critics, and he even critiqued some of the excesses associated with the Great Awakening. His words and perspectives were highly regarded. Preaching outside his pulpit in Boston in 1731, a spiritual revival began that reached such an intensity by 1734 that nearly 300 of 1,100 youths were admitted to the church. The work of men like Stoddard and Edwards laid the groundwork for the itinerant preachers who would shortly follow. One of the greatest of these being the aforementioned George Whitefield. Whitefield was a notable evangelist of the Great Awakening in 1700s America, who turned the Christian evangelical revival into an intercolonial or national movement. Whitefield was a Calvinist Anglican minister in the Church of England, who studied at Oxford University with the founders of Methodism, John and Charles Wesley. Known as the Great Itinerant, he was the first man to travel up and down the East Coast in North America, reaching and preaching in all 13 colonies. He made his first, most famous continental tour in 1740 from Boston, Massachusetts to Savannah, Georgia. Whitefield could enthrall large audiences through a potent combination of drama, religious eloquence, and patriotism. Whitefield received widespread recognition during his ministry. He preached 18,000 times to perhaps 10 million listeners in the British Empire. In 1 year, Whitefield traveled 5,000 miles through America, preaching more than 350 times as he traversed the nation north to south. An estimated 25,000 people gathered on Boston Common to hear him speak. Another 12,000 heard him in Philadelphia, and 8,000 in New York City. His journey on horseback from New York City to Charleston, South Carolina, was at that time the longest ever documented in North America. His work changed the nature of preaching in America, as well as helped to unify the colonies prior to the American Revolution. The Great Awakening notably altered the religious climate in the American colonies. Ordinary people were encouraged to make a personal connection with God instead of relying on a minister. Newer denominations, such as the Methodists and Baptists, grew quickly. While the movement unified the colonies and boosted church growth, some historians claim it also caused division among those who supported it and those who rejected it. Known as the New Lights and Old Lights, respectively, nonetheless, the Great Awakening unquestionably had a significant impact on Christianity. It reinvigorated religion in America at a time when it was steadily declining and introduced ideas that would penetrate into American culture for many years to come. The revival also led to the establishment of several renowned educational institutions, including Princeton, Rutgers, Brown, and Dartmouth universities. The evangelical movement that was the first Great Awakening played a key role in the development of democratic thought, as well as the belief in the free press and that information should be shared completely unbiased and uncontrolled. Many historians claim that the First Great Awakening influenced the Revolutionary War by encouraging these notions of nationalism and individual rights. Now, not everyone embraced the ideas of the Great Awakening. One of the leading voices of opposition was Charles Chauncey, a minister in Boston. Chauncey was especially critical of Whitefield's preaching and instead supported a more traditional formal style of religion. By about 1742, debate over the Great Awakening had split the New England clergy and many colonists into two groups. Preachers and followers who adopted the new ideas brought forth by the Great Awakening became known as the New Lights. Those who embraced the old traditional ways were called Old Lights. When New Light revivalists drew massive crowds and preached in public, local Old Light ministers worried that the preachers were undermining their spiritual authority. Old Light ministers insisted upon sober and rational sermons and religious practices and rejected the passionate New Light theology and style of the evangelical preachers. In addition to challenging religious authority, the revivalists would also challenge social conventions. Following their conviction that all believers were equal before God, some evangelicals allowed women to exhort or preach informally during meetings. Evangelical teaching also challenged barriers based on social class. The messages of these radical preachers resonating with those on the lower rungs of the social ladder. Pulling away from ritual and ceremony, the Great Awakening made religion more personal by fostering a sense of spiritual conviction, of personal sin, the need for redemption, and by encouraging introspection and a commitment to personal morality. It incited rancor and division between traditionalists who insisted on the continuing importance of ritual and doctrine, and revivalists who encourage emotional involvement and personal commitment. It had a major impact in reshaping the Congregational, Presbyterian, Dutch Reformed, and German Reformed churches, and it strengthened the smaller Baptist and Methodist denominations. The Second Great Awakening, which began about 1800, reached out to the unchurched. The First Great Awakening focused on those who were already church members. It changed their rituals, their piety, and their self-awareness. So, little review: Old Light preachers believed religion should be practiced in a rational way, while New Lights preachers propagated emotion in religion. Old Light preachers believed in salvation through God's grace, while New Light preachers believed in salvation through charity. The Great Awakening represented a reaction against the increasing secularization of society and against the corporate and materialistic nature of the principal churches of American society. A number of conditions in the colonies contributed to this revival. 1. An arid rationalism in New England. 2. Formalism in liturgical practices as among the Dutch Reformed in the middle colonies. And 3. The neglect of pastoral supervision in the South. The revival again took place primarily among Dutch Reformed Congregationalists, Presbyterians, some Anglicans, almost all of whom of those were Calvinists. By making conversion the initial step on the road to salvation, and by opening the conversion experience to all who recognize their own sinfulness, the ministers of the Great Awakening, some intentionally, others unwittingly, democratized Calvinist theology. Indeed, the evangelical styles of the religious worship promoted by the revival helped make the religious doctrines of many of the insurgent church denominations, particularly those of the Baptists and Methodists, more accessible to a wider cross-section of the American population. The revival preachers emphasized the terrors of the law to sinners, the unmerited grace of God, the new birth in Jesus Christ. They frequently sought to inspire in their listeners a fear of the consequences of their sinful lives and a respect for the omnipotence of God. This sense of the ferocity of God was often tempered by the high promise that a rejection of worldliness and a return to faith would result in a return to grace and avoidance of horrible punishments of an angry God. The Great Awakening stemmed the tide of Enlightenment rationalism among a great many people in the colonies. One of its results was the division within denominations. For some members supported the revival, others rejected it. And as we mentioned before, the revival stimulated the growth of several educational institutions, including Moore's Charity School, founded by Puritan Reverend Eliezer Wheelock in 1754, reestablished as Dartmouth College. King's College, founded by Anglican Reverend Samuel Johnson in 1754, renamed Columbia University. The College of Rhode Island, founded by the Baptist ministers Reverend James Manning, Reverend Isaac Backus, and Reverend Samuel Stillman in 1764, renamed Brown University. The increase of dissent from the established churches during this period led to a broader toleration of religious diversity and the democratization of the religious experience fed the fervor that resulted in the American Revolution. Toward the end of the 18th century, another revival, known as the Second Great Awakening, began in New England. Generally less emotional than the First Great Awakening, the second led to the founding of more colleges, seminaries, and mission societies. Kentucky was also influenced by revival during this period. The custom of camp meeting revivals developed out of the Kentucky revival and was an influence on the American frontier during the 19th century. The Second Great Awakening produced a great increase in church membership, made soul winning the primary function of the ministry, and stimulated several moral and philanthropic reforms, including temperance, emancipation of women, and foreign missions. Around 1835, revivalists traveled through the towns and cities of the United States and Great Britain, organizing annual revival meetings at the invitation of local pastors who wanted to reinvigorate their churches. In 1857 and 58, prayer meeting revivals swept U.S. cities following a financial panic. The preaching tour of the American lay evangelist Dwight L. Moody through the British Isles in 1873 through 75 marked the beginning of a new surge of Anglo-U.S. revivalism. In his subsequent revival activity, Moody perfected efficient techniques that characterized the urban mass evangelical campaigns of early 20th century revivalists that followed, such as Reverend Reuben A. Torrey and Billy Sunday. The Second Great Awakening can be divided into three phases. The first phase, from 1795 through 1810, was associated with frontier camp meetings conducted by American preachers in Kentucky and Tennessee. The second, more conservative phase, from 1810 through 1825, centered in the congregational churches of New England. The third and final phase, from 1825 to 1835, stemmed from the activities of evangelist Charles Sanderson Finley, who began his revivalism in small towns in western New York in the 1820s, but eventually conducted revival meetings in the largest cities in the U.S. and Britain. As a lawyer, a theologian, and college president, Finney was also the most famous revivalist of the Second Great Awakening. He did not merely lead revivals. He actively marketed, promoted, and packaged them. To understand what the Second Great Awakening was, we need to go back to earlier revivals. The current social environment of the 1800s, during that first half of the 1800s, the population of the U.S. grew from 5 to 30 million. The nation's boundary moved ever westward. Revivals became the primary means of Christianizing the growing and expanding population. These revivals at the beginning of the 19th century became known as the Second Great Awakening. Four results of the Second Great Awakening were: many people were converting and joining churches, new methods of evangelism were adopted, the growth of missions, and improved moral behavior. As the First Great Awakening helped to lead to the Revolutionary War, the Second Great Awakening helped to lead to the Civil War. In the decades before the Civil War, the Second Great Awakening was the most powerful social movement in America. It inspired the conversion of millions of Americans to faith. And that faith motivated many of these people to attempt to transform the moral habits of the nation. Slavery was ended. Consumption of alcohol was supposedly reduced. Women's rights, though often opposed by people of faith, were set on a path that would result in women's suffrage in the early 20th century. A host of other reforms, too many to list, were instigated. September 1862, weeks before he issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln wrestled with the enormous dilemma of whether to change the stakes of the Civil War. As he deliberated, he committed his thoughts to paper. In a private document that his secretaries found after his death, the president struggled to understand what God expected of him and of the nation. Like many of his religious supporters, Lincoln believed that God had willed the Civil War, and in time he would echo popular complaints that cast the suffering imposed on the nation as divine retribution for the sin of slavery. But where Lincoln grappled with the question of which side God had chosen, most Northern religious leaders, lay and clergy alike, were certain the Union was on God's side and God was on the Union's. The aspect of the Great Awakening that had significant political influence was its focus on the individual's independent judgment. This view of religion had political implications as it rejected the traditional hierarchical structures and allowed individuals to think and act independently. This revival movement focused on individual judgment rather than relying on established religious authorities. This encouraged the ideas of self-determination, personal liberty, and democracy that were necessary for the successful establishment of the United States of America. Thank you, folks. Have you any questions?
There was a lot of churches that were formed in the 1830 area.
That is true. There was a lot of different divisions, denominations, other preachers went their way. I took part of the congregational members with them. And it became an evolution, really, throughout the United States that these different denominations spread out and formed. The common denominator in almost all of them, however, was they had been encouraged to stop looking at authority as the only guiding principle in their lives, whether it was colonial authority or the congregational church authority or what have you, but rather to think for yourself, become independent, and decide what was going to be your own fate. And that led right up to the Revolutionary War.
So after the Pilgrims came, I'm guessing there was a move away from the Church of England, and it never really got big after that, and on the state side, or is that not correct?
Well, it depends on where you are. Gotta remember, Pilgrims were not Anglicans. The Puritans were not Anglicans. These people were dissidents, and England wanted to be rid of them. So they put them on a boat and sent them over. They did the same thing with William Penn, who was a Quaker. They wanted to be rid of him. Off they went. The heaviest concentration of Anglicans was in the South. That's where the most loyalists came from also, as well. Now there, everybody else was a dissident from England, and then later the United Kingdom after 1705 when Scotland was brought into the British Empire. These people were already not the happiest with England because they colonized the United States, not necessarily because they were looking for new opportunity. They had to get out of England because they were being persecuted, put in jail.
That's why you are start dying. Moved out of there from King John and
They were barter stocks and one of them fighting.
Yes,
Fighting the English and the Catholics.
yes, but those were the Presbyterians.
300 years.
And most of them went to Western Pennsylvania. And boy, there's another presentation on what they did over there. That I have, but they were the Presbyterians. Again, not totally united with the Church of England. And needed to seek to go somewhere else to practice their religion of faith.
What was known as German Dutch were really dissidents in Europe that came through Ken with the Friends Church in the Pennsylvania.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Maryland was Catholic. And it was illegal to be a Catholic in Great Britain. So Maryland was Catholic. The Mennonites, which you just mentioned, which were also the Amish, William Penn invited them in and said, come on over here. And they settled in the Lancaster Valley in central Pennsylvania. The Dutch Huguenots or the French Huguenots came over because they were persecuted. They had a portion of it. The Welsh had a portion of it. The Dutch Reformed Church had a portion of it. They were all dissidents living in the English colonies, later the United States.
Raised one other question about dissidents. The word Protestant and Protestant, when did it change from Protestant to Protestant?
Well, now mainly that had to do with Catholicism and Martin Luther, because he was the one that nailed the theses on the church, and that was done in Europe. Now my relations on my father's side are all German. They are Bavarian German who stayed with the Catholic Church, where the majority of the rest of Germany went Lutheran. But everything became a protest after a while.
But it became Protestant and American English rather than Protestant.
And for example, the Baptists were not Protestants. They didn't break out away from the Catholic Church. They were not Protestants.
Based on the pattern of great awakenings that have occurred throughout, our history, do you have any conjecture about when the next might take place and what social and political impacts that might have on America?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. Who knows? Nobody expected the total overturn of society in the 18th century by these religious revivals. Nobody expected the colonists to come together the way they did in 1776 with an independent spirit and break away successfully from a much larger nation. But that was part of what now had been ingrained into the last several generations, was their independence and self-determination.
It also seems like that would give a person a lot of courage or whatever, if you were, say, Irish and you were chased out of, Ireland and you had to come over to the country, because if you would have stayed, would have lost your life. Then when it came time to fight here, I think that would be a lot more of a reason and really a determination in order to make it work.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Scots Irish came into Philadelphia and moved into western Pennsylvania. Doesn't have anything to do with religion, but they also met up with German and Austrian rifle makers. So they were much more successful because they didn't use the smooth more muskets. And they were accustomed to fighting the Indians when the revolution broke out. So they didn't fight the way George Washington's trained troops fought. They hid up in trees, behind logs, down in ditches.
And it had nothing to do with it. They had a different method of approaching combat. Yes, they do matter.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We've got a certificate of appreciation. Randall. Says, certificate of appreciation and recognition of his support of the McKinney chapter, Texas Sons of the American Revolution by presenting the program Religion in the English Colonies and Early American Republics, the Great Awakening at the chapter meeting on this day. So, thank you again so much. Thank you, Tom. Enjoy. Okay.
Question for,
Oh, one more question. Yes.
have you done the genealogy to trace your ancestors to George W. Bush?
No, I'm not related in any way, shape, or form. My name is spelled incorrectly.
Oh, it is?
It had a C in it.
Huh?
And to show you how social conventions can affect people, my father took the C out in the late 1930s to avoid persecution because he was German. And that goofed up roughly 1,200 years of that history. Oh, you were just.
Thank you.
It was about the same Irish. She was they had 8 children. Every other child. That's how they.
Our ward people.
The day they died, they trusted her.
We are honored tonight to be able to present the Eagle Scout Award to Sophia Bursley Chavez, who's definitely an independent thinker, a hard worker. She's been raised right by her parents. She'll one day be a leader. We're very proud of her. This time she is going to read her essay, then we'll present the award to her. You can have one of the microphones, if you have to, we'll have a microphone. Either, okay, perfect.
So the literary effect on the American Revolution. Although the soldiers who fought for our freedom during the American Revolution are important, we often overlook the people who stayed back to maintain the American spirit. Philip Renaud, commonly known as the poet of the American Revolution, played a vital role in shaping the public opinion during the American Revolution during his writing. Renaud's poetry and journalism not only portrayed the spirit of the American independence, but also galvanized support for the revolutionary cause, making him a key figure in the fight for freedom. Renaud was born in 1752 in New York City. Although his parents were prosperous merchants, they had prepared Renaud for intellectual and artistic pursuits. When he was 10, his family left him in New York with tutors to receive proper education, which led him to attending Princeton in 1768. During this time, poetry found its way into all his writing. Much of the early writing aligned with British contemporaries and was influenced by early English poet critics. Critics agreed his writing was beyond his years, and that his poem, The House of the Night, 1779, illustrated promise as a poet. Leading up to the Revolution, Renaud wrote numerous poems about the British treatment of the colonies. He expounded American democracy with his pre-war poem, American Unity, 1775, and denounced Britain with targeted poems such as The Prison Ship, 1780, which he wrote after being a prisoner on a British prison ship. Ungenerous Britain you, conspired to murder those you can't subdue, the British prison ship. He wrote after he was held in the most notorious prison ship, the Jersey. The poem contains accounts of his experience in the Crampton Seas prison ship, inflaming public opinion. His vivid imagery to depict British cruelty is what inspired resistance and boosted American morale. As the British were calling American rebels, in his poem to the Americans, he emphasizes words like rebel, truth, and cord by capitalizing them. This emphasis tells the readers he's proud of them for separating themselves from the British monarch. that they're doing the right thing and they should no longer feel restrained by unfair policies. Renault's poems weren't his only form of influence on the public. In the 1780s, he contributed to the pro-revolution newspaper, Freeman's Journal, and later, in the 1790s, he was an editor of a strongly Republican National Gazette. He spread revolutionary ideas and exposed British atrocities. In addition, through his persuasive articles, he encouraged readers to support independence. Philip Renault's contribution as a poet and journalist significantly impacted the American Revolution by inspiring colonists and fostering unity. He helped define the American Revolutionary spirit through art and literature. Finally, his writing demonstrates how literature can serve as a powerful weapon in the struggle for freedom. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. First, we have a check for $200. We have a certificate of recognition. That is real quick. Then we also have. We'll let you wrap this up. This is Joel. One more. And then, can you introduce us to your family? Who's here this morning?
Yeah. So I have my mom and my brother, and then right over there is my boyfriend of 2 years.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll be right. Yep. Okay.
I think as most of you all are aware, we had a 130th state convention here just a few weeks ago for the Texas Sons of the American Revolution. Which, if I understand that right, that means it's been around for 130 years. So it's sort of a milestone in itself. But anyway, so we had that convention, and basically the McKinney chapter and the Dallas chapter co-hosted that convention, as y'all know. And so I think it turned out quite well. At the end of the day, we were pleased with what happened and the results. And there are a lot of people here that made this happen. And so at this time, I'd like to recognize them, the ones that are here tonight. And as I call your name, if you would come up and start forming a line here, because there's several of you here. Okay, so unfortunately, Paul Andreessen isn't here, but we will take care of him next month, right? Harry Barnett. Peter Ford. Wheeler Graham. See, Mark Harrison isn't here, so we'll work through that. Pete McClellan. Bill Taylor. La Sharibi. Tom Van Fossen. Tom's a dual member, but we would not have succeeded without him, we tell you. And then Bill Watts, who wasn't able to make it tonight. So anyway, again, we had a lot of people involved, and I just wanted to thank everyone who anyway, who did that. So really appreciate you guys. I know a lot of you guys said, well, I just came and sort of showed up and sat at the table and maybe helped registration or sign locks or something. It took a lot of people to make this happen. So anyway, so I wanted to be sure we caught all of this. Gary, congratulations. There you go. That's it. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Bill. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you. Yeah, thank you. You really made a good time, I think. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for coming here. Appreciate you. Well, let's see. Well, you're out of order. Okay, well, I'm gonna go over here and give Bill his. Okay, now then we're gonna do this. Now, well, let's do it. Yeah, there you go. But anyway, so again, thank you so much for all that you did for us, and like I said, we couldn't have been able to do it without you. So we got.
Thank you. Tom also, he does a big contributor. Thank you. You did more than all of us.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I got one more thing and then I'll let you take it. Don't go away, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So. So. Peter and I actually together and did one of these things, 2022. And basically, it involves trying to keep a lot of data organized and taking it from one format to another and making sure everybody got the meal they wanted to eat each day. And if they had some sort of an allergy to something, to handle all of that, and where they rank in the pecking order of the SAR, and addresses and phone numbers and national numbers and all that stuff. So anyway, we went through it, it worked out real well that time. So when we did it again, I said, Peter, would you mind doing this again? And he said, yeah, I think I can do it. It's pretty easy. Well, it turned out due to various things that happened, that had changes that had to be made because of what we all go through every day with spam and all sorts of things in our email system. They started to change things up a little bit, unbeknownst to him when he started this. So before it was over with, he was gathering this data off of emails that he had to start a search for to get, and then taking it and putting it into, I don't know, how many columns does that spreadsheet have?
I don't know, it had way too many.
Way too many. I mean, it's, you can't get it on a sheet, an 8.5 by 14 sheet of paper and still be able to read it. Okay, it was that bad. So anyway, there was a lot of blood, sweat, maybe a few tears, and probably a cuss word or two involved. In all of that. But so we talked about that, and I talked to the other people at the state organization, and we determined that we wouldn't have been able to do this without you. So this is a state level award. We're going to give you the Texas. Let me get it out of a Ziploc bag. The Texas Silver Service Medal. Okay. Nice. There you go. And then here's the certificate that goes with it, the Texas Silver Service Medal, in recognition of his service and support to the Texas Sons of the American Revolution 2025 state meeting by serving on the host chapter convention committee. And like I said, there were a few weeks there where he was beginning to wonder what have I, because this guy still works full time too, okay? So he was beginning to wonder, what have I gotten myself into? Let's move out there a little bit to the big picture. Thank you so much, appreciate it, brother. Especially, he's not gonna say yes so easy to this time.
I don't think you're either.
I'm not going to it. My back in the back of the room. Already told me about that.
Thank you.
All right, well, appreciate you. Thank you. Okay. Next. Oh, yeah, you want. Oh, I don't like the sound of that.
If you haven't run a meeting at a state level, you have no idea the amount of work it was in. By the way, the spreadsheet that you talked about was 9 pages and then taped together. It was laying on my dining room table. It was a tremendous piece of work. Since the Texas Association was founded over 130 years ago, they have been awarding a special award to the people that do exemplary work. It's called the Patriot Medal. It's the highest medal that you can be awarded by the state. There's been over 19,000 people that have been members over the years. There's only been 100 or 213 people that have received the Patriot Medal. There's only 169 of us still left. We're very fortunate here in this chapter to be represented by Pete McCollum, Bill Graham, and Nathan White, who's not here. They're also members of that. This last meeting, your friend, my friend, Tom Wilson, was awarded the Patriot Medal. He deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, I think I'm for
It's a spreadsheet.
Congratulations, Tom, very well deserved, as we all know. So we have a few more things here, any announcements for old business? Back from the floor, announcements for old business? All right, our next meeting is May 15th here at Spring Creek Barbecue. On the back of your program shows our upcoming events, the poster contest, April 28th, Cornerstone Christian Academy in McKinney. May 15th is our meeting here, as we mentioned a second ago, Spring Creek Barbecue. May 28th through July 11th. This would be wonderful if you have the opportunity to go down and see or to volunteer in downtown McKinney at the Collin County History Museum. The SAR has brought the program and we are helping to participate with that. There is a flyer on your table here that explains that, and it's the traveling experience of the American Revolution. It's been on tour and it will be here, I guess, for a little bit more than 30 days. It's going to be a wonderful exhibit if you have the ability to go down and see it, and especially to volunteer. If you're able to volunteer, if you could contact Tom or me or Paul, and we can assist with that. And Tom has his email address on the back. You're able to do that. The March minutes have been posted to the website. Hope that everybody's had the opportunity to review those. And this time I ask for any motions concerning the March minutes.
Make a motion to accept and read.
That's Tom Milson, motion to accept. Second, Tom Van Vossen. Call to the vote at this time. All in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. It passes. Minutes are approved. Now for the treasurer's report, Peter Ford.
Sir. Here's the treasurer's report for tonight's meeting. So at our last meeting in February, funds were at $550.27. Our expenses this month were $175 of awards. That was for their poster contest, $200 for our Eagle Scout Award. And our income this month was $1,080 from the Texas SAR for membership dues, $135.35 for dual membership dues, and $114 for new membership applications. Chapter's available funds are now $1,504.77. Now, this does not include the Project 2026 money, which is currently at $1,810. The chapter CD balance is currently at $5,245.20. That account will be closed on April 26th, and the amount will be made available for chapter funds. Are there any questions?
Have we received any disbursement as a result of our participation at the convention?
Not yet, but I hear will be about 3,000 available once that comes in. Sure, we'll put that to good use. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other business or announcements from the report? Yes, sir, Tom.
Just mention, I've got, if anybody's interested, I've got a notebook back here that has all of the available times in it. Again, for the, basically the program that's gonna be over at the McKinney History Museum. Got times for you to sign up. I'm also gonna put out an email in the next day or two that will talk about it. And the easiest way to do it is there'll be a QR code in the email, or the one right here now, captured. And you just basically, aim your phone at that like you do a menu. It'll come up and it'll show you a schedule of times when you can sign up. There's two areas where we sign up. One of them is the SAR volunteers for each one of the days. There's a morning and an afternoon period. And there's also, they're looking for people who could provide transportation for the ladies, the DAR ladies who are sponsoring this. It may not can be able to get out and around relative to going into McKinney and that sort of thing. So we're looking for people to be willing to give them rides into, so they could serve basically their time and their 3-hour window there. So anyway, so I'll be putting that out. If some of y'all want to come by and look at this and then fix your time and write in here, I've got paper version of it all here, if you want to do that before you leave. Or if you'll be watching your email, you'll be getting that. It'll give you 2 or 3 ways which you can get on. And basically, it's a an automated spreadsheet that you can go in and put in which days you want to volunteer. So, anyway, I'll be back in 10 minutes.
Anybody else? All right, at this time, Tom, you begins the benediction, at least stand.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time together. With like-minded people who are doing our best to preserve our history and the ancestors who made all the freedoms we had, including our freedom of religion, to us. And many of them in the great comprised of the other. Father, we thank all of the things done for us, things and the people we touched through our organization here, from the youth programs that we do, and through the veterans that we watch out after, and various other areas where we contribute. Go with us now, be with us until we meet again. Something grace.
Amen. Thank you. Please join me in the central. Till we meet again.
Let us remember our obligations to our forefathers who gave us our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, an independent Supreme Court, and a nation of free men.
We are adjourned.